unfortunate Stephen is not here because,
Yeah, he's the most passionate about this. All right, we're recording.
well, we all are, I think, passionate, but we have different agendas. Or rather, a lot of the
Priorities.
key issues that are still contentious are between me and him and Tim also. I think actually I found myself converging with Tim lately. You're still
We are
yeah, one thing that would be interesting to me, unfortunately would waste your time a bit, but would help me finally wrap my mind around why micro arguments are the building blocks of a multi-premise argument.
Yeah. That's Stephen's point. So I'll try to make it for him, but it's I disagree with him up to a point. I mean, I did agree with him in the private meeting, but I thought more about it, and I'm finding myself disagreeing again. One point I do agree with him is that as a human operation, people start with this A implies B. They start with microarguments. They start with single premise. Then it gets enriched. But the thinking starting point is usually single premise. And then when you're building multi-premise, what will you build it from? It will be from single premise most of the time. You're saying, well, I'm saying A implies B. You're saying C implies B. Well, can we put them together? So as a UX operation, I agree totally with them. However, where we disagree is that he's saying basically A and B implies C. A either supports or opposes C. B either supports or opposes C. So when we do the multi-premise argument, A and B or A or B or A XOR B say supports C or opposes C, either way. Those would be built from the microarguments and hence inherit not just the fact that they share the same conclusion and the same, they either both oppose or both support the conclusion, but they also oppose, well, the conclusion with its polarity, that is. But they also hence take the whole polarity of the microargument, which is not a given for me, and I gave the prisoner's dilemma as a counterexample. And I really want to expand on this one because I realize you asked the very good question of composition. How is a multi-argument composed from microarguments, right? And I said, I don't see it as composed from microarguments myself, except that it might have been, it probably will be the UX process of saying, take this microargument, take this microarguments and combine them into a higher level argument. But that's just historical. But what I do think will happen sometimes, and I'd really like to get into the logic of, let me just get back to my text because I want to be sure about the conclusion. If I say, where's my example? 1 second, I want to get it. Okay, if I say A betrays, I'm using A and B for claims, so let me use X and Y for the prisoners. X betrays Y supports, let's say I say it supports the notion that the prisoners will get similar sentences. And I'm saying that's true, but only if Y also betrays X. So I'm adding a premise. So I'm saying your single argument function, saying A betrays Y, makes it likely that they'll receive similar sentences, is first I'm expanding to a new argument and saying this is true in a partial application of the two argument function. I'm saying, if I'm saying y betrays x and also I'm holding, if I'm saying x betrays y and I'm holding y betrays x constant, then it does indeed support. But if I'm not making it constant, and then, so first I'm adding the variable with a constant value, and then I'm expanding to the full range of the domain of the second variable. Now, if y betrays x is not true, then it has the opposite effect, and hence the polarity is not preserved. So I'm saying adding an argument is really two-step. I'm saying maybe your original micro-argument was true with this, while holding this value of this other hidden premise constant, i.e. assuming that premise was true. But now I'm saying in the full form, maybe we can't assume that premise to be true, and hence I'm expanding.
So, like, I see what you're getting at there, but I don't know if this matches the way I would model arguments in such a situation. Because here you're talking about the claim is that X will get a sentence of 5 years or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
I'm using similar
first of all, we have this
because
mutually exclusive relationship, right? X will get a life sentence, X will get a sentence of 5 years, and X will go free, right? Those are three mutually
I'm using the
exclusive.
similar because it's a good way to to get the XOR.
Yeah, but so the way that would be modeled though would not be an XOR in my mind.
What you're saying, yeah, but I'm saying it is a valid claim. I can make the argument about similar sentences, whichever they are. It's a valid claim.
Well, let's just think through it real quick. To prove X will get the, or support X will get the sentence of 5 years. Then you have an argument that is X will betray Y and Y will betray X. Okay.
But I'm assuming Y betrays X as constant, so I'm just saying, oh, Y betrays X implies they'll get the same sentence. It's a shortcut. I'm leaving the other one under implicit. And then you say, wait a second, you're making an implicit.
Okay, but then you need to, at some point, somebody's going to argue again. So, but Y isn't going to betray, and then that's, you need to add in that premise.
Exactly.
And it becomes, and that migrates to the end. It's not an XOR, right?
It's an XOR.
It's not an XOR for the betrayal, for the 5 years. For the betrayal.
No, and that's why I choose specifically will have the same sentence, because I wanted to get an XOR.
Okay, I know. So I guess the claim that would get an XOR would be that it would be the equivalent of one of them will betray the other, but the other won't. That's the claim that's an XOR.
What I'm saying is,
right.
If I take the claims, and I can fix the claims, Y betrays X, X betrays Y, they'll get the same sentence. The relationship between these three claims is an XOR.
That's an AND.
It's an XOR.
It's an AND. Because you're saying that X will betray Y and Y will betray X.
No, I'm saying I'm taking three separate claims. The first claim is Y betrays X. The second claim is X betrays Y. And the third claim is X and Y will get the same sentence.
But X and Y will get the same sentence is a conclusion of X betrays.
Yes, and I'm saying
right, the conclusion
is no. If X betrays Y and Y does not betray X, they get different sentences. If Y betrays X.
Right, but what you're trying to prove is they'll get the same sentence, right? And you can disprove it by simply proving that X did not betray Y. Right?
No.
Yeah.
No. Okay. If
because if they don't betray each other, then they will also get the same. I get it. Okay. Now I'm on it. Okay.
I choose an example to get an XOR. It wasn't that easy.
Sorry to waste everybody's time with that. I'm on board.
and frankly, that's not the point. Maybe my example is bad. Like the point I'm trying to make is XOR is a possible. I found an example, maybe another one can be found. But XOR is a possible structure.
Sure.
And
Right.
that
That's
means
the macro point. Yeah.
that's the macro point. And you cannot assume that the polarity of the whole polarity of the micro argument carries over in the extended argument. That was one point I was making. Though it's true that if you don't think of the micropolarity, but as are you opposing or supporting the conclusion, then yes, it has to be the same for the merge to happen. But the point, the second point I made like late yesterday as opposed to early yesterday or the day before, is we can do composition as partial functions. And I think that's an interesting insight because it happens frequently. I'm saying
Right.
if A and B then C, I don't know what happens if A and not B, not A and B, not A and not B. Maybe I don't know any of those. I just know that if A and B, then C. And then you come around and say, well, if not A and not B, then not C, whatever. And then somebody else comes, well, if A and not B. And so each of us can have different combinations of the truth table. And those are all perfectly valid
Conclusions.
Arguments, like
Okay.
links between certain truth values and probability value of the conclusion. And I'm saying a partial argument is a valid argument. I'm ignorant about certain rows of the truth table, but I'm making a statement about at least certain rows of the truth table. And if you come around and make a statement about different rows of the truth table, then those can be composed into a fuller and possibly total or not argument from the same variables.
Sure, but that is done by I mean that is the essentially the example that I was giving of the X is a life sentence or X is 5 years or X goes free. You only have two facts that you're debating, which is X will betray or not and Y will betray or not, and you combine those into the outcome for several different claims.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying I start with a truth table in a total truth table in one variable. And what you're saying is actually your truth table is only valid if you keep a hidden second term constant, and that becomes a partial truth table in two variables. And if you combine it with the other values of the truth table, you've added the missing premise.
Okay, but there's no holding something constant, right?
Well, that's what a missing assumption is. I'm saying.
Exactly, I get that. Okay, that's the implied premise.
That's the implied premise. You're holding the implied premise constant, and what you're saying is saying, hey, you've got an implied premise here, so let me first add it and say you have been holding it constant, and second, making it vary to get a fuller arguments. So what you've given me as a single argument function is actually a partial function with the hidden argument constant.
But so then the discussion goes on to, well, okay, you have two separate micro arguments that are actually two different parts, right?
Of the partial function.
Of the partial function. One is Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, and the other is all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal, and you're going to combine them.
Yep. And I'm saying that combining them is extending the range of both of them, and they're both partial functions with one hidden variable constant, or they can be redefined as, to be more accurate.
Right. That's interesting. I don't know if that helps us get further in terms of how to model these, though, because I'm not like, I mean, there's a couple questions. One is just how do you model Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. What if that comes out of the blue? That's the first argument somebody makes. Okay, they're starting with the more complex multi-premise. Then there's the question of you started with one and somebody sees a need to add the implied premise because they want to argue against it. for example, or they see that it's necessary. They just want to help out and fill out the necessary. Because, for example, there's already a debate about whether men are mortal, and they want to say, yeah, this is necessary.
Which Oz was modeling, yes.
Yeah.
Can I suggest something?
Uh-huh.
Like, I think that both the idea of multi-premise claims and the complex arguments are dealing basically with sets of claims, and they are modeling some relation within this set of claims. So the question is, what are we trying to achieve with this, and what problem is it solving? Because I am all for making sets of claims. I think it's useful to have sets of claims, but I want to see what these two implementations do.
I think I can quickly answer that question. One problem it's solving is when you have implied premises, there's a couple problems with that. When somebody wants to argue against an implied premise, which is very common, it's like, you think that's true, but that's not true. Let me show you how. Where are you going to put that argument against the implied premise? You can put it against the claim that Socrates is a man, right? You could, Socrates is a man, conclusion, Socrates is mortal, by saying, not all men are mortal, right? But there's this kind of mismatch there. And it's very possible, this being the canonical debate, that you already have tons of arguments for and against the statement, all men are mortal. So somebody's argued not all men are mortal, but you've got to bring that, so you can bring it into the discussion by reusing that claim as an argument. But then what is the relevance of that argument against, right? Because there's a debate about a relevance of an argument. How important is this? Well, and this is something I keep trying to bring up, is when it's a multi-premise, the nature of the relevance is 100%. It's like you can't draw the conclusion without proving first that all men are mortal, right? You can't say he's a man, therefore, if it's not always true, right? And so the relevance is 100% to that discussion. And in essence, to me, that's what a multi-premise, there's this discussion about whether that premise is needed, right? I agree with that, but it's a binary thing. Either you need that premise to prove the conclusion, then I'd like to hear an example of not.
So I think it's what you said is having a lot to do with relevance. So you are making sure that the implied claims or the assumptions are relevant to the claim. But if you ignore relevance, you can put all the implied or all the assumptions in a global scope that they are relevant to all the claims. And this is, but then you have to decide which of them are true and which of them are not true. Because you have contradicting claims, and only one of them could be right.
I think before we start talking about global scope, because I can see Marc-Antoine's brain is about to ask a question. Before we dive into that, I'd like to ask Marc-Antoine, are you saying that we shouldn't retain what did we call the micro arguments? When we combine them, because that breaks our ability to be flexible with the combined argument. Actually, I forgot the terms completely.
Okay, I have no objections to micro arguments being retained as an object. I don't think they're necessarily useful. Like, to answer a question Tim was asking earlier, is when I bring in a second argument, do I need to bring it as a micro argument, or can I just add a premise to an existing claim? I mean, either way, I'm constructing a new claim, and I'm constructing a two claim. Does that claim need to point to two micro premises, or can I just say, well, I started with this micro premise and then I'm adding a second claim to a second premise to make it a multi-premise claim? Do I need to have the other claim be part of a pre-existing multi-premise claim? My answer would be no. Stevens would be yes. So that's one thing on which we differ, but that's my answer for what it's worth. I don't think we absolutely need to have a multi-premise. So I'm saying it's not necessary. We could make it necessary for reasons, and I'm not against it because it's dead weight, but it's not hindering, in my view. What is clear to me is that you cannot express the whole logic of complex arguments, complex multi-premise arguments, using only the component micro arguments. And hence, I'm saying multi-premise arguments use of the component micro arguments, if any, is limited. So that's one argument. Now, sorry, there were many questions that were related. The question of relevance, I'm just curious what you mean by 100% relevance. I gave the example.
Okay, this is me leaping to the white paper logic. Like sometimes I make these leaps to using
if
white
I say
paper
probability of C is 0.8 probability of A plus 0.2 probability of B.
Okay, wait. But okay, let's pause because there's the way the white paper treats claims versus arguments, right? Is that claims are truth using our definition of truth, meaning really agreement or acceptability. Okay, so which is, you know, X, what is it? X betrayed Y and Y betrayed X. Okay,
Right.
so you have X betrayed Y. You're just discussing whether or not it happened. There's no context in the lowercase use of the word of, you know, anything else it relates to. It's just that you can discuss that on its own.
Yeah.
And then the Y betrayed X. Okay. And you can discuss X betrayed Y and Y betrayed X under the same terms. So you can resolve the truthfulness of that independent of anything else, right? Now, relevance is using a claim or a composite claim in an argument. Relevance is a score, we're using the scoring mechanism, but relevance is the impact or the effectiveness of using that as an argument on the other claim, right? Or argument. You can also use it
and I'm
against
saying
argument.
it's not always linearly decomposable.
So what I'm saying is when it is linearly decomposable, that's what I mean by 100% is, no, okay. So when it's probability, you're talking about, you know, I say there's a 70% chance X betrays Y, and there's a 50% chance Y betrays X. Then your situation of this and this and is a lower probability. You multiply the probabilities and you get a lower truth factor. But the impact is something like it's how important it is to the debate. So there's two different aspects that I break out, which is relevance. How relevant is it? Are you talking about the same thing, right? So it could be a study, for example. It's a partial study that is interesting to know, but doesn't fully prove the end fact. Or it can be a study of like worldwide when you're talking about a very specific neighborhood. And so in that case, its relevance is not a complete 100% overlap with the thing you're talking about, right? That's one kind of relevance, right? It's an important data point. It doesn't prove the fact. The second thing is what I call impact.
And that's my 0.2% is more impact, I guess.
You know, how big an impact does this have on the if you 100% prove this thing, does it totally change your mind, or does it lean you more towards one side or the other, right?
Yeah, and that's my example of a stochastic variable. What I'm saying is I agree in a way that things are either relevant or not relevant. I'm wondering what you meant by 100% relevance.
I'm talking about what distinguishes this thing that I said about, okay, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. And you bring in an argument, yeah, but not all men are mortal, right?
Yeah.
In truth, in order for the conclusion to be drawn, this is a deductive argument, so you need both things to be true. And there's no saying, yeah, it's kind of important that all men are mortal, but not really, because it doesn't sway me that much, or there's a different kind of relationship there in terms of how relevant is this to the outcome, right?
Okay, I think we'll need to dig into this, but I just wanted to be sure. I don't think we're at odds here, so let it go by, because there's other questions that were important. There was us question I want to come back to. What's the point of all
But
this?
let me bring up why this is important.
Yeah.
Let me just bring up why.
No, but my objection does not stand. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah, we'll dive into it another time. But what's important to me here is one thing that I've learned from our discussions that impacts the way I would design the CD is you really do need a way to debate, or at least define, which premises are important to the conclusion, which ones really are important. All men are mortal, and Socrates is a man, and he wears shoes. You can make that multi-premise claim, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that relevant? Again, 0% relevant. But so you need a way to debate and discuss which ones should be included, right?
And what I'm saying is, the question is, does variation of that third premise, of that third claim, of that third premise, does it ever affect the truth value of the function? If it doesn't, we can say it's irrelevant.
And that's exactly what I'm saying 100% relevance is, because there's no it kind of convinces me, or it's kind of related. It's either important to the truth function or not, right? Exactly. It's an all or nothing thing.
Yeah.
Right.
But how is that determined? Like, how do the users express this in the system, or is there a sort of algorithm that finds out what's relevant? Like, how does it work?
And this is, for me, the functions are what's being negotiated, right? It doesn't emerge from the system. However, so that means the users have to somehow express the functions. Now, how they'll express it, and this is why everything I said about partial functions is important, because most of the time the users won't be bothered with defining a function and all the rows of the truth table. They'll just say A hence B, and so they're in a way defining a single row of the truth table, or they'll say A is necessary or A is sufficient, which is already a nice abstraction step higher. So they're defining two rows of the truth table at one time. But what I do think is important is for the system's ability to detect and point out contradictions between truth table values on their defined domain. So if I'm saying, Socrates is mortal because Socrates is a man, and then you say all men are immortal, there is, because they have an eternal soul, there's a point where the system has to, and of course the system doesn't know at this point that all men are mortal is a hidden premise of the first claim. But the moment someone introduces that, the system has to be able to say, hey, wait a second, we have a contradiction. This claim is clashing with this claim. And here, those claims being even the, not only at the conclusion level, but at the argument level. The arguments are clashing. And that's something I expect the system to do. How to fill in the functions, what I'm saying is, most of the time people will fill in one or two rows of the truth table at a time. But the system can detect that. Oh, look, these rows are conflicting.
Well, another point is, I think that even when you have some arguments with very logical form, like all men are mortal, you still have, you can still in real world encounter a lot of fuzziness. So let's say I say Achilles is a man, and Achilles is immortal, or is he immortal? Because he was, he was,
Well, he was not quite a man. He was he was a hero, and hence, child of a goddess.
So
his status as a man is debatable.
If he's half a man, that's exactly where, or not a man. So is he mortal or not mortal? Because he can be killed, but he can't be killed usually. So it's like it makes everything fuzzy. And even though
No,
we
but-
have this
but-
claim that is really true, that all men are mortal, we can't derive from it that it has 100% relevance.
Except that what you do then, this is where we come down to the definitions aspect of context that we've talked about, right? You need to clarify, and so, you know, what do you mean by mortal? What do you mean by man? You know, all non-mythological, non-fictional men, not related to the gods, are mortal in the sense that they eventually die.
Their body dies.
Their physical body dies.
At least
right.
the body dies.
Yeah.
But maybe they uploaded their consciousness to a computer and then was reborn as a clone.
Okay, but that's a new debate. That's a you can debates never end.
And then we
right?
get into immortality defined as an unbroken stream of consciousness.
No, but then yeah. But again, we're talking about Socrates. So you prove Socrates is a man. You prove that Socrates, you know, all men at the time of Socrates' time were mortal. You know, and you didn't upload his brain. And you resolve the problem that way.
There's actually a field of logic that's called the feasible logic, where you say you're making this argument and then you're contradicting the conclusion. So which part of the premises do you need to revisit? There's a study of the feasibility, and it's got these notions of probabilities, and it's got these notions of typicality, like this is typically true. And if there's an exception in the conclusion, well, this is probably the premise that is broken because
and this
broken,
is
that is only typically true as opposed to universally true, and so on. So that's a field. And by the way,
this is critical to the long-term vision of the CD as helpful in decision-making tool and governance, which is, you know, why did you decide to do this project? And it was based on these conclusions at that time, and it evolves over time, and suddenly you get to a point where one of the factors or one of the claims is no longer true by the majority, and it's like, well, should we continue this project, right? Governance requires revisiting these decisions repeatedly based on changing facts, right?
Absolutely.
So go ahead, Marc-Antoine, if you want to.
Two small points. One, I was asked recently when describing hyperknowledge, what's the difference between changing your mind because of new facts versus changing your mind because you're changed your mind and you're just reinterpreting old facts, or you know, new facts come that change the state of the global state of the world versus new facts come that change your interpretation of old states of the world, and these are distinctions. Another thing that's happening is we speak a lot about probability, but there's this whole work by Judea Pearl about when can we infer a causal network from a probability network. And this is now a field of research, and it's absolutely worth digging into, because the contradictions to a causal network.
What is a causal network?
Like you're saying, in the probability network, you're speaking about correlation, and in a causal network, you're speaking about causation. So you're saying not only are these things correlated, but we know that this is actually caused by that with a certain probability, and so on. But the way you defeat, in terms of the feasibility, a causal network, it's a stronger prediction, but it's also more subject to refutation. Like when you have new facts that go against previous facts, you might adjust your probabilities a little if you're speaking about probability, but you may have to invalidate a whole causal pathway in two alternate causal network explanation of the probability network. So this is a much stronger claim in like saying this is the causal network behind that probability network. And sometimes there's different causal networks and experiments can distinguish them.
So I'd like to kind of take a step back and say, are we still trying to define the glossary? Because it sounds like we've moved into modeling, which is fine. But do we want to put a stamp on the glossary and say good for now? Or do we need to to
Well-
define these terms better in
Uh,
order to have the discussion on whether or not we use the microarguments or not, or whether required or whatever.
I think that, for example, the expansion of functions to include partial functions, I think that's needs to be part of the glossary. The notion of we've been back and forth a bit on the do you oppose a claim or do you actually support its negation? Maybe we need to revisit that a bit, but I don't think that's a big deal because
Yeah, and once again, I think it's just important we have the terms to have that debate, not that we need to solve that debate.
Here's a fundamental thing that's been bothering me about the glossary process is it seems like we're focusing on nailing down things that don't need to be nailed down when you're just trying to name things, right?
that's kind of the point of a glossary, yes.
No, but like, for example, why can't we define opposes as being supports the negation, and then we can use the word freely? Why do we need to nail down whether it's a multi-premise argument or a multi-premise claim when we can say a multi-premise claim is defined as this and a multi-premise argument is defined as this, and let's discuss which one we want to model. It's like we're trying to win the modeling discussion under the guise of the glossary, when a glossary should just have competing terms as long as we know what we're talking about, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of where I was heading. So I'm just trying to decide, I guess, if we're there, if we need to add a couple of terms or
We
delineate
need terms
some
because we're using a lot of terms that never made it into the glossary.
Yeah.
So
I guess we need to identify those and then start filling them out.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems like to me a good process for this ongoing might even be, we can move on to discussing modeling. Anytime a word comes up and somebody's like, well, that's not in a glossary, what do you mean by that? Go ahead and define it. And if somebody has a competing definition, you need to either decide to use one or the other and agree on it, just to let the discussion go forward, or come up with two different words for competing ideas.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah. So it's not like saying that we're done with the glossary, but have we kind of codified what we know for now and we're ready to dive into the other thing, or do we have a couple of terms we want to clarify before we go on? So I don't know. So Marc-Antoine, I don't know if there's any things that you've discovered in the last week that you want added to the glossary.
Well, sir, I need to reread the glossary, frankly.
Me too.
The question of, for example, there's many things I take for granted. That, for example, an argument is a kind of claim. And it's basically a claim about at least a few rows of the truth table leading from the premise to the conclusion, or to a probability distribution in the conclusion. And I don't know if we agree on that. Is that definitional or is that modeling? I think it's also definitional. Like, for example, total versus partial function, that's pretty definitional in my world.
I think it's only definitional, not modeling, because here's the problem I have is that when we go to modeling, I'm going to want to use the word argument, and it's not going to mean what the glossary means. It can't. It has to be more specific than the glossary. So I don't know what's going to happen when we have the same word in both the glossary and the model that are different.
So
you should be able to describe one in terms of the other, right? You can say,
so I'm going to have to use 5 words in the model.
My claim in my model, like the claim in the canonical debate white paper, is a composition of the claim and its negation. And I can't remember other elements, but
yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's not how I use the word claim. That's a good example.
Yeah. So, but I mean, so we are going to have the same word defined 2 different ways in 2 different contexts.
That's not healthy. Yes.
Well, I don't see any way around it. That's why I wouldn't have done a glossary, because then we're using up our words that we can't use in the model. And now I don't have any.
No. I agree totally that the glossary and the models absolutely have to agree.
Have to what?
Agree.
That's not possible.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, because we're going to have an object called a claim, and it can't be both an argument and a claim. It's a claim. It's an object. We're talking about an object called claim with the label
Anybody
claim.
Heard about subclasses? I'm saying arguments are a subclass of claim.
But then
so if it's an argument, it's also a claim because it's a subclass of.
But
right.
then
No, we can model.
What do I call the thing that is a subclass of claim that is not an argument? I have to come up with a name for that. Well, that's the thing, is I can't even tell you which thing because I don't have a word I can use for it. But there is something.
What you would have to say is, for example, in Gruff, I model an argument.
Right. And it's composed of
as a separate class. It's not a subclass of claim, even though in the glossary we agree to call argument essentially a sub. We're not using the word subclass, but we're saying that an argument is a claim, right? Okay, but I'm modeling an argument as a separate.
You don't have to use subclassing, but I'm saying I may use subclassing, and that means something can be both an argument and a claim. So, I was reacting to you. It cannot be both an argument and a claim. I said, why not? But I agree that it doesn't have to, like, it can be so conceptually, but it doesn't mean it has to, that the conceptual subclass has to agree with the modeling subclass. Fair enough.
Well, right. So, I mean, right now, the definition of a claim within Reason Score and Properly in Graph is, it's a sentence of a statement, and we call that claim. That's the object type of claim. And an argument is a composition of those. It's a very simple model. So now we're saying we can't, in our future model discussions, we can't use the word claim to mean that. Okay. Or at least that's the way it is in Reason Score. So now I have to rename everything, which is fine.
The reason we could use atomic claims for claims which are not arguments, but the reason I'm trying to avoid that is that I want to be able to use any claim, including an argument, as a premise for another argument. Not necessarily the conclusion of that argument, which is a separate case, but the argument itself could be a premise for another.
And I've seen some cases where that might be necessary, but I personally haven't seen how to model that. I agree.
It's simple if arguments are claims.
Well, right.
But that's
right.
It, yeah.
I guess. Yeah. The thing is that in our old terminology, arguments can target arguments. Yes. So that it works. It's just we're just using the word argument to mean what you mean claim. So it's just a different naming convention.
And we have to be very careful because for example, I just introduced a distinction. Be careful when you're using an argument as a premise. It's not the same using the argument as a premise and using the conclusion of the argument as a premise. And when you say arguments targeting arguments, I'm wondering if it's the same kind of category error at play or not. Maybe it isn't. I want to point out there's a category error there, and we want to be sure of not making it.
I think it's also maybe an issue of API. Like you can model arguments and claims however you want, like as classes or variables or whatever. But the API eventually need to make some kinds of operations on claims and operations on arguments that reflect that that an argument is a claim.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there are three different levels that I see here, right? There's the glossary, which are the words we're going to use to debate how we should model the interchange format. The interchange format is the shared model, right? And then we can each take the shared model and do our own implementation of that shared model, as long as we're able to send data back and forth using that common language, right?
And as Oz points out, do the kind of same operations, which is not
exactly.
a given.
Right, and there's some problems there, right? I mean, and some
but
of the problems
with
versioning, we're trying to keep experimenting while being able to pass on everything that happens, right?
But you're right that shared operations is a level distinct from sharing data. And sharing data as a level, actually, I'll argue, sharing data as a distinct level from no-op round trip, which is always more demanding.
All right, so I think I have to. All right, yeah, I think it through. I think we're going the terminology used in the interchange needs to match the glossary.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know about that.
Well, it doesn't need to. I mean, it would. I'm not saying it has to.
Let me put it a different way. I'm fine with that as long as the process revises the glossary to match the interchange.
Yeah.
Right? I'm fine with that.
Well, yeah, but I don't think we're going to I'm saying if Marc-Antoine defines claim as is something that can be, I don't remember what the definition was, but something that can be argued against, and you can argue against what we used to call arguments, thus arguments are subclass of claim, then that's rewriting our existing data models. Like that's renaming everything, which is fine. It's just got to understand that we're not going to probably go back and say, oh, a claim is a statement that you can argue against. Does that make sense, Tim? That we're going down kind of a new path from our old terminology. And I don't think we'll go back, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No,
we can clarify, but.
Yeah, I realize I do need to revisit the treatment of negation, which I think we had concluded. I don't even remember what we had concluded. But when Tim says the claim contains the thing in its negation, well, when I'm supporting or opposing a claim, I'm supporting one side only, right? So there
and
has
opposing simultaneously the other.
And opposing simultaneously the other. But so there has to be something that is the basic thing, which I would like to call deposit following Renbeck, but the deposit that is either supported or opposed.
Right.
The elementary thing that is behind the binarity. I would reserve claim for only one of them, but I'm not.
And in the glossary, we're doing that.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
So I still want to have that argument on whether you would ever, I don't know how to say it now because I don't have the glossary memorized. So maybe this next week we should all read through the glossary and come ready to discuss.
I think so.
But I don't.
What about claim pair, Tim?
What about what?
What about what? Claim pair?
Yeah. What you're.
It's not necessary. These are not words I would expose to the end user. And when it's not exposed to the end user, I'm happy with going with the definition and sticking with it and understanding what it means.
That's very interesting. There is definitely a set of the glossary that is for us to agree on. And there's a set of the glossary that we'll definitely want to expose to the end user. So maybe agreeing on which part is going to be user-facing, which part of the glossary do we expect to be user-facing, and being very, very clear about those is a good goal for next week.
Yeah, I would, yeah. I don't think I can think through, my preference would be to wait on that later, but that's just because I can't, until I know how we're mapping it, I don't know how, or not, yeah, I don't know how people think about it.
Huh.
Right, because usually I do think of, when people say a claim, they're thinking of the sentence they're saying. And we've already said that that's not what a claim is.
Not false, though.
So I don't think I can, yeah, I don't know when I would be, I'd almost have to see the interchange and then say, oh, this word we're using here, people are going to think of it as this over here. But
yeah, my temptation is always, let me give another formalization of the model to see where the rubber meets the road, but I will make it an effort by next week to have a glossary at that, just so we can align on that.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to memorize it, which I've been reluctant to do.
folks, I had a bit of a hard stop. I realize I now have, after we agreed on the date, I realize I now have a regular meeting at 25 minutes ago. That starts 25 minutes ago. So the date doesn't
Oh,
suit me anymore.
no.
Mark,
no.
would you mind just proposing either another day or another time, and let's just in the chat at some point, and let's see if.
Yeah, sorry. So right now I decided to prioritize this, but I'm having to find a way to deal with this.
I think we're still
Apologies.
fairly flexible, so.
Okay. I noticed that a lot of this was made to accommodate
Jamie.
Jamie, who is not here.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened.
Well, it was also for me because I've been having lots of meetings scheduled over our meeting time at work on Mondays. And today, yesterday I was on the road, so I would have missed yesterday's too.
Fair enough.
But
How's Wednesday or Thursday? I'm open.
it varies. It varies. I have many
Okay.
open times.
Or what about pushing it a half hour earlier? Would that work with people?
That
On
works
Tuesdays,
for me.
it would. Yes.
We might just mention it in the Slack channel and see if anyone else disagrees.
Okay, because that would make a difference for me. It means I'll have a hard stop, but
Okay.
okay, folks.
All right, we'll let you go.
And Bentley, let's have that second conversation, but today is meeting land wall to wall. I don't know when I'll eat.
Yeah, we're having regular meetings about that. So if you just want to try and join the regular meetings, but if you don't have time,
The Thursday one, right?
I don't know. I'll check and let you know. I don't remember now. Too many meetings.
Ciao, ciao.
All right, bye-bye, guys.
Bye.